They say time softens the sting, but I'm not sure that's true. It's been months now since everything started to unravel, and I still wake up sometimes wondering how it all turned so cold. My name is Elise. I'm 36 years old, and for 3 years I tried to build something lasting with Nick, who's now 37. We met in Asheville, North Carolina, a town that felt calm enough to start over in. Back then, I was optimistic, independent, cautiously hopeful. I wasn't a perfect partner, no one is, but I truly believed we had a strong, healthy relationship. That belief shattered a year ago when I discovered Nick was cheating. I can still remember the moment. My hands trembled. The air left my chest. I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to pinpoint what I had done wrong. But the truth is, betrayal doesn't need a reason. It just needs someone willing to lie. Despite the devastation, I tried to forgive him. He apologized with all the right words, swore he would earn my trust again. For a while, it seemed like we were healing. For 8 months, we managed a fragile peace. He seemed invested in rebuilding what he broke, and I, foolishly perhaps, clung to the hope that we could move forward. That's when he came to me with an idea, a business he wanted to start. He asked for my help, and I gave it without hesitation. I wrote the entire plan, helped him navigate the permits, the logistics, the filings. I poured my time and expertise into something that was never truly mine. And in return, he asked to be appointed as my partner. But that was never on the table. I couldn't blur those lines. I've worked hard to build my life. I wasn't the top of my class in college, but I never stopped learning. I earned every certificate I could get my hands on and took every course that would sharpen my skills. By 28, I was self-employed. I had built a foundation that was mine alone, and I was proud of that. When Nick and I met, he claimed to run a small agency and said he was about to accept a government job, blaming the economy for his stalled plans. I didn't mind. I respected him, or at least the version of him he showed me. But it didn't take long before I found out about his ex. He had been seeing her behind my back. It gutted me. I had been kind, supportive, patient. I helped him financially. I kept our home in order. I even tried to look nice for him every day, hoping he'd see how much I still cared. We split bills evenly, even though it was technically my place. I thought we were partners. After months of turmoil, I forgave him. I wanted so badly for things to work. For a brief period, he seemed to try. He landed a new job, acted attentive, loving. I tried to let myself believe again. Then last October, the cracks reappeared. He suddenly insisted I stay out of his startup, distanced himself, became cold and irritable. He stopped initiating affection, avoided intimacy. Every conversation shifted to his frustrations, his needs, his exhaustion. He had lost his job again, COVID layoffs, he said, and the pressure seemed to eat away at him. But it also made him cruel. We had just moved into a rented house that I adored. For me, it was more than a home. It was the place where my dream became real. I'm an animal lover. I've rescued more than 10 cats over the years, most of whom were strays I'd been feeding for a long time. I built them a climate-controlled catio, complete with automatic litter systems and round-the-clock access to food, toys, and clean bedding. They're vaccinated, cared for, and loved. Nick knew about the cats from the beginning. He used to say he admired my compassion. But after we moved in, everything changed. He started complaining. First it was the space, then the smell, which wasn't real, just another excuse. He said his family needed a place to live and asked me to get rid of my cats. That was never going to happen. He wanted to move his mother and siblings into the spare rooms, people who had never treated me with respect, people I knew would never contribute a cent. They had a pattern. Every one of them seemed to abandon relationships the moment children were involved. Nick told me stories about his ex going crazy after giving birth, about his brother dumping his partner at her parents' house and never coming back. Another brother vanished after a second baby arrived. And now, Nick wanted to bring all of them under my roof. He argued that our house was big enough, that it would help them save on rent. But what about me? My boundaries, my peace? I was already covering most of our expenses. His contributions had dwindled to almost nothing while I funded his so-called business dreams. He wanted me to give up everything, my cats, my office, even my quiet, to make room for people who saw me as an obstacle. I didn't realize until it was too late that I had been slowly erased. The stories he told me about his brothers used to sound like cautionary tales. I just didn't know I'd end up living one of them. His youngest brother left his wife right after their second child was born, disappeared without so much as a goodbye. Another convinced his pregnant girlfriend to move in with her parents while he found them a house. That house never existed, but the second baby did. Her parents banned him from ever stepping through their door again. They all ran from responsibility the second it got real. And somehow, they always ended up back under their mother's roof, together, like one big dysfunctional safety net. Nick said he wanted his family to move in with us because we had space. 3 spare bedrooms, a large family room. It would help them save on rent, he said. But what he really meant was, they wouldn't pay anything and I'd carry the weight. Again. By the end of October, my body finally caught up to my spirit. I got sick. Not just a cold, but the kind of sickness that leaves you curled up on the couch, aching all over, unable to eat, unable to think. I cried through the pain, through the fever, hoping for even the smallest gesture of comfort. Nick didn't come. He stayed away, saying I might be contagious. It wasn't COVID, just exhaustion, maybe. But he didn't care. He never asked if I needed soup or water or medicine. He just vanished into another room and left me alone. Thanksgiving came and went. I lay in bed under a pile of blankets, still recovering. He left early that morning to be with his family, didn't even ask if I was okay. I didn't have my loved ones near. I'd given that up for him. I left my support system behind, convinced that love would be enough. We'd talked about marriage once, in some distant version of our relationship, when dreams still felt shared. But now I know he was never mine completely. He'd been back with her, Laura. I found out by accident. I was going to hire a private investigator, but stopped myself. I already knew. His phone was lying open on the table one night, and I looked. Just 3 weeks of messages, but they told me everything. They were sleeping together. They had never stopped. I sat there in silence, unable to breathe. I held the truth inside for days because the pain was too sharp, too fresh to touch. We don't talk now, not really, not about anything that matters. He hasn't asked what's wrong. He knows. Laura's social media was a dead end, but her mother's profile told me more than I ever wanted to know. Nick had been part of their lives since last summer, long before he ever asked me to help him build his fake business. He lied about job interviews, about struggling to find work. I've been the one footing the bills, keeping the lights on, supporting his dreams while he played family man somewhere else. There's a trip coming up. He says it's a business trip to the British Virgin Islands. I doubt there's anything business-related about it. Laura's mother posted something vague about a trip abroad. That's all I needed to see. So I'm leaving. First, because the pain has become unbearable. Second, because I can't share a life with a liar. I've already started making preparations. Quietly, carefully. I will not give him the satisfaction of knowing I'm about to disappear from his life.
I've spoken to the landlord. I'll be leaving the house earlier than planned. My exit is timed around his flight. I hired a pet transport company for my cats because I refuse to fly them in cargo. They'll come to pick them up at 9 a.m. Nick's flight leaves before 6. That gives me a narrow window to breathe, to escape. I'm moving closer to my family. I've arranged to board the cats temporarily until my sister finishes building the new catio. I'll be living on my own property, mine alone. No ghosts in the walls, no shared keys, no lingering questions.
The movers are scheduled for later that same afternoon. I'll have time to sort my belongings, pack my life into boxes, and separate what's his. Everything that belongs to him will be shipped to his mother's house. I don't want to see him. I don't want to speak to him. I want silence, closure, distance. Every joint project has been canceled. I've locked him out of my business network, deleted all shared files, erased the business plan we built. I'm changing every password, every PIN. The emergency Visa card I let him use, revoked. The joint account I stupidly allowed him to use for personal expenses, drained and ready to close. I'll time it all with his flight. That way he won't have a chance to retaliate, to drain what's left, to show up. There's always the risk that his family will come knocking, but I won't be here. He can move in with Laura if he wants. Maybe she still lives with her parents. Either way, he's not my burden anymore. I'm walking away, and I want to make sure there are no pieces of me left behind. I kept asking myself if there was anything I missed, any document, any loophole, any accidental signature that could tie me to the ruins he left behind. The business, if you could even call it that, was something I built with him in mind, not realizing I was just scaffolding he'd abandon once he found a prettier structure. I tried to reassure myself I had control, access, ownership. But what if there was a form I overlooked? What if he still had some kind of influence buried in paperwork I never saw him sign? Some Reddit commenters had warned me. One wrote, "The red flag was trusting him with your accounts and credit cards. You let a man with no stability get too close to your life." It stung, but they were right. I didn't just give Nick a hand, I handed him keys to everything I had spent years building. And he used it. Used me. Another message hit harder than I expected. It read, "Elise, you've been emotionally neglected and manipulated. But I'm proud of you for waking up. Change your phone number. Get tested. Block him. Cut him off so deep he can't find your shadow." They weren't being cruel. They were showing me the kind of clarity I was too close to see. I did everything they advised. I made a list from their suggestions and built a checklist for my escape. It helped me stay focused through the blur of heartbreak. I didn't want to make a dramatic exit. I just wanted to be free. Quiet, final freedom. The pet transport service arrived right on time. I watched through the window as they gently loaded each crate into the van. My heart squeezed at the sight, but I knew they were safe. My sister had already prepared the new indoor catio. It would take up the entire middle bedroom of my new home. Bigger, warmer, and full of windows for them to watch the world from. They'd be okay. I just had to believe I would be too. Nick left earlier than expected. Before 5 a.m. I'd thought he'd wait until 6. Maybe he was eager to flee the silence we'd both drowned in these past few weeks. Maybe he sensed something. Either way, I was grateful to avoid another confrontation. The night before, I barely slept. I was too busy unraveling every thread that connected us. Canceling services, deleting shared files, closing accounts, erasing my presence from anything we once touched together. It was painful, but necessary. Each deletion, each disconnection felt like breaking a bone that had healed wrong.
I'm thankful I never gave up my home office. He wanted that room for his family, his mother, his siblings, their chaos. He even hinted at removing the catio so we could reclaim that space. He wanted me to shrink so they could stretch out. But I held on to that room. I needed it. It was the only place in the house that still felt like mine. My sanctuary. My line in the sand. That night, I locked the office door and worked in silence, dismantling the digital life we had shared. It hurt, but resentment is a strange kind of fuel. It burns away the weakness that heartbreak leaves behind. After Nick was gone, I finally moved through the house. I sorted what was mine, what was his. I boxed his belongings one by one and labeled them for shipment to his mother's home. I didn't want to see his face again, not even through a peephole. No goodbyes, no questions. Just distance.
On my way to the bank, I dropped off his suits at a donation center. He didn't need them. A man who manipulates others doesn't deserve to dress the part of a professional. I also donated all the unopened food in our kitchen. I couldn't bear to eat any of it. Even the labels felt tainted. At the bank, I met with a teller at a different branch, one far from the one we used to visit together. I didn't want to risk anyone recognizing me, asking about Nick. I had a checklist of everything I needed. Close the shared account, lock the credit report, cancel every card, especially the emergency visa he used as if it were his. I removed him from every reward system, from my grocery store accounts to the pharmacy. It felt absurd, removing him from things so small, so mundane, but it mattered. These little ties, they were still ties. I changed my phone number later that day, once I was sure everything else was secure. For a short time, I kept the old one, just in case his family tried to contact me. I didn't want to be caught off guard. If they called, at least I'd have a warning. I used the hours during Nick's flight to sever the last financial threads between us. It was the only time I felt truly safe, when I knew he was high above the ocean, unreachable. The movers came later than expected. Some furniture had to be taken apart. They were kind, didn't ask questions. I handed them the final things Nick had left behind. Tools, a workbench he barely used. Gifts, once given in good faith. Now, just clutter. I wasn't angry anymore, just empty. And that emptiness felt like peace. The movers were kind enough to help with the last of the disassembly. I handed over all the tools that once belonged to Nick, along with the workbench I had bought him when I still believed in the version of him who wanted to build something honest. It felt strange, closing that chapter not with rage, but with a weary kind of sorrow. They helped me take down the catio, too, the one I had poured my heart into, the one that had brought me peace when everything else was falling apart. I couldn't bring myself to take the bed with me. Too many memories clung to it like mildew. I asked the landlord to keep it. I wanted no trace of Nick's weight or warmth, not even the faintest impression on a mattress that used to hold two people and now felt like a monument to loneliness. All of his belongings were labeled and documented, boxed and shipped to his mother's home. I was told delivery might take a day or two. I didn't care. I just needed them gone. The landlord already had the keys. I left as soon as I could, wiping the counters, sweeping the floor, erasing the life we shared one last time. I was terrified that he might call his family, have them show up, confront me, accuse me of running when all I ever did was stay too long. I donated most of my own clothes, too. I left them at the same drop-off where I'd left his suits. I didn't need them. The fabric, the colors, the shape of who I had been around him, it all felt poisoned. I'm not one for designer labels or fancy wardrobes anyway. Whatever I replace them with will be simple, quiet, comfortable. That's all I want now. Peace.
I gathered every piece of electronics I had ever bought him. The gaming consoles, the desktop computer, the tablet. Tools I once gave him so he could chase dreams he never intended to catch. I had hoped they would help him focus, give him purpose, but now they felt like relics of my own gullibility. To avoid any chance of crossing paths with his family, I drove 4 hours out of Asheville to a small Airbnb in the countryside. The fog was heavy, the roads unfamiliar, but it gave me the distance I needed. My body ached from exhaustion, my mind felt raw, but somewhere underneath the fatigue was relief. I had done it. I had left before Nick landed in the British Virgin Islands, where he was supposed to be on a business trip. But the moment he tried to use the card I canceled, he'd know. And I didn't care. I found more things that made me feel stupid, things I had forgotten, things I had overlooked. But it no longer mattered. What's done is done. I opened his external hard drive to delete any files that belonged to me, and instead found something that made my stomach turn. A mock-up of a digital business card. Laura, his mistress, listed as Chief Marketing Director of the company I created. The audacity, the cruelty. They're living in a fantasy, a business that doesn't exist, a title that means nothing. She knew about me. I had read her texts, sometimes pleading, sometimes indifferent. She wasn't innocent. Her mother and sister even did a public Facebook check-in at the airport in the British Virgin Islands. So no, this wasn't business. It was a getaway, likely funded with the money I worked for. I doubt her mother likes him. Her posts hinted at interference, subtle but clear. I imagine the chaos will begin once Nick returns and tries to access the house. Maybe the landlord has already changed the locks. If not, the empty rooms and shipped boxes will speak louder than any confrontation. Everyone says I should go to therapy. I will. My anxiety is a constant companion now, clinging to my chest like a second skin. I also accessed Nick's tablet, one I had bought for him to organize business notes. It was still logged into his email. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. It was cathartic and devastating all at once. He hadn't just lost his government job, he'd been fired. Then he lied. He lied about interviews, lied about getting hired, lied about not getting paid. All those days he said he was hustling, he was wandering through malls, sending Laura photos of his breakfast like a bored teenager. At least I wasn't a side piece. He was single when I met him, and for a while I clung to that like it made a difference. It doesn't. Their messages confirmed the breakup. Laura is young, 25. She works. Her family seems close. She wanted to believe in him too, asked him to choose. He dangled empty promises, told her he'd leave me once she found a better job, once he felt secure. Once. Nick even brought home a suitcase full of documents once, claiming they were marketing materials. I was excited until I found out they were discarded files from Laura's office, confidential client documents. That was the first red flag I saw when I learned they were back together. I refused to let him use them. It was illegal, and I wanted no part of her life. At first, I said nothing, but after reading her cruel texts while I was sick, I decided to send the files back to her boss through my lawyer. I didn't use them. I never exploited them. If they get caught up in it, that's their own doing. Now I'm here, near my family, safe but drained. I feel used, thrown away, disposable, and what's worse? They all knew. It hit me harder than I expected, the realization that they all knew. His friends, his family, even Laura. She knew I existed. She called me manipulative, said I was pretending to be sick just to get sympathy. I read her words, cold and smug, accusing me of being stingy because I wasn't giving Nick more money. And Nick, he didn't defend me. He agreed, in his own way. His replies fed her assumptions, validated her contempt. It was like watching my own erasure in real time. Nick had dreams, big, empty ones. He spun stories about breaking into industries he didn't understand, talked himself up like he was already a success. But there was never any work, never any growth. He relied on my skills, my reputation, my network. He had no patience for the word no, and no willingness to earn a yes. All he had was my goodwill, and he burned through that like it was endless. I will never again build a life with a man hoping he'll rise to meet me. I need to rebuild, yes, but this time the foundation will be mine alone. No scaffolding for someone else to climb. My sister, she's always been steady, even when I wasn't. She's agreed to let me coach her through a new business idea. Maybe I'll take pieces of Nick's failed venture and repurpose them for her. She deserves something stable, something honest. She writes everything down, learns fast, works harder than anyone I know. I think, for the first time in months, I'm beginning to feel useful again. And it helps, knowing I left him with a mess of his own making.
Let Nick move in with his sharp-tongued sister and her kids who jump on the furniture and climb the walls. Let him figure out that the business website is gone, that the email address no longer exists, that I won't be there to foot the bill for another fancy dinner masquerading as a networking event. Maybe he tried to pay for Laura's family on one of those cards, tried to be the hero. I'll never know. I don't need to. Let him enjoy life with his younger brother, who's still knee-deep in custody battles and drama. I'd almost laugh if it didn't feel so pathetic. These men, so loud, so reckless, leaving wreckage behind them year after year, and the women who clean it up. My next update wasn't firsthand, but it shook me anyway. I spent New Year's Eve with my family this year. It felt strange, almost wrong, to be surrounded by calm. No tension, no icy glances from a disapproving mother-in-law, no anxious scanning of the room to see if Nick was trying to cover for another lie. We kept it simple. Home-cooked food, familiar voices, cousins I hadn't seen in years. It reminded me of who I was before all of this. We took precautions, masks, vaccines, but what I really needed protection from wasn't a virus. It was the constant second-guessing, the tightrope of trying to keep a failing relationship upright. My sister and I talked business again. She's serious. She's already enrolled in courses. She doesn't want shortcuts, just a path forward. I told her I'd outsource some of my smaller clients to her once she's ready. She lit up. And for the first time, I didn't feel drained when someone needed something from me. I got to reconnect with my nieces and nephews, too. They've grown so much. I'd missed entire chapters of their lives. While I was busy saving someone who didn't want to be saved, my family was here, waiting, hurting, but still whole. We helped the pets settle into a quiet room before the fireworks started. I had already installed soundproofing before I left Asheville. I hoped it helped. Small acts of care. That's what I'm focusing on now. The next morning I left early and spent the entire day in my pajamas, watched old sitcoms, laughed at things that didn't matter, ordered sushi and pizza, and let myself eat without guilt. I'm still tired, physically, mentally. Maybe it's just the weight of finally putting down something I'd carried alone for too long. Then came the call. Andy, my old landlord, reached out. My lawyer had suggested I leave him a number in case there were any follow-ups. I'm glad I did. Andy told me Nick had shown up, first alone, claiming his key was broken. Andy didn't buy it and sent him away. Then he came back with reinforcements, his mother and sister, and said I had left some of his belongings with Andy, that I'd told him to come by. It was a lie. Andy refused to let them in. But Nick didn't stop there.
He started spinning his usual lines, claiming he was a businessman, respectable, the real victim. He told Andy I was trying to ruin him because I knew he'd succeed without me. The same story he always told when someone finally got tired of his excuses. Andy was kind enough to call and verify everything. He was uncomfortable. Said Nick tried to blur the lines between landlord and confidant, tried to make Andy feel sorry for him. I was embarrassed. Not because of what Nick said, but because I was ever close enough to him for any of this to reflect on me. Looking back, it shouldn't have surprised me. When we were together, Nick always blamed imaginary enemies for his failures. He'd mutter about people out to get him, shadowy forces ruining his chances. No names, no facts, just a swirling fog of paranoia. I used to laugh it off, but now I see it for what it was: a defense mechanism, a way to avoid accountability. The unraveling started the moment I finally said it out loud, that he wasn't trying, that he was floating on empty promises and expecting me to carry the weight. That's when he turned on me, said I couldn't handle the breakup, that all of this was happening because I was bitter and vindictive. Then he did what he always does. He tried to manipulate someone else into fixing it.
After I left, he showed up at the house, asking Andy, my former landlord, to let him stay for the rest of the lease. Said he just needed a few more weeks. But of course, the answer was no. The utilities had been shut off, the lease was in my name alone, and there was no legal ground for him to linger. His sister, always eager to insert herself, suggested Nick bring a mattress and crash there anyway. Just use the space until the next rent cycle. It didn't matter that they had no right, no shame either. Andy told me later that they stood around outside the house for a while, even after being asked to leave. Nick's mother argued, his sister sat defiantly on the steps like she belonged there. Andy told her that sitting on the staircase wasn't allowed, and she snapped back, just enough to anger him. Nick kept insisting he had business documents inside that he needed to retrieve. That was his angle this time. But Andy stood his ground. He finally had to threaten to call the police. Only then did they step off the property and retreat to the parking lot. Andy described Nick as flushed, jittery, rambling. He said Nick spent the entire time painting himself as the victim, that I had betrayed him, that I was trying to destroy him because I was afraid of what he'd become without me. He even tried to elevate himself to Andy's level, calling himself a professional, trying to blur lines and create camaraderie. Andy wasn't fooled, but hearing it made me feel ashamed, like his delusion had somehow splashed onto me. I contacted my lawyer again, just to make sure everything was still protected. Legally, there's not much I can pursue. Nick always used his mother's address for anything official. It's what he listed during his legal battle with his ex-wife, too. There's a trail of calculated evasion in every part of his life. My sister sent me screenshots later that week. Laura's mother had been posting cryptic messages, rage dressed up as wisdom. It seems Nick's sister and Laura's sister had been clashing online, tossing barbs and vague, hostile language. I didn't know Laura's sister, but I knew Nick's well enough to recognize her venom. The posts were full of bitterness about people who pretend to love you and then ruin your life. Warnings about groupies and fake women who leave after getting what they want. Women like me, I guess. She posted quotes, too, about loyalty, about family being all that matters. Nick was tagged in several. It was all so familiar, so twisted. That family loves to wound people and then retreat behind the safety of victimhood. They're too fragile to take blame, but ruthless when dishing it out. Then there was Laura's mother. Something had clearly shifted in the past week. She'd been posting erratically, emotional rants, cryptic captions. From what I could piece together, they had celebrated New Year's Eve, but Nick's face was nowhere to be seen. All her children were pictured with their partners, except Laura. It was like he had been scrubbed from the frame. I noticed something else too. Laura hadn't been tagged in her employer's holiday posts. It's a small company, I know their style. I went down that rabbit hole when I first found out about the affair, and they used to tag every employee in every celebration. She was there for Thanksgiving, but not for Christmas, not for New Year's, not even the smaller entries posted in between. She's still active on her own profile, but she's been excluded. Then her sister, who lives overseas, posted a photo of all the siblings together. Laura commented with something hopeful about family, and her sister replied, "You're amazing. I'm sure God has something beautiful in store for you next year. Remember, when a door closes, 1,000 more open." I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone in the fallout. It's strange to feel sorry for someone who played a role in your pain, but that's where I find myself now when I think about Laura. I don't like her, not after the way she mocked my illness or called me greedy, but I also see how she's become a scapegoat for Nick's failings. I don't know exactly what happened between them during that trip, but they're clearly not together anymore. Her social media presence has gone quiet, and she no longer works at the firm she was so proudly featured in. Her mother, once silent, now posts cryptic, bitter messages, ranting about parasites, losers, and the men who attach themselves to women with ambition. Maybe their breakup had nothing to do with me cutting Nick off. Maybe she just saw through him, like I eventually did. Or maybe he pushed too far in front of her family and something cracked. I imagine things escalated, that his mask slipped in front of people who weren't as easy to manipulate. He never shows anger to those he needs. It's not his style. He turns on the charm, sweetens every word, makes himself look harmless. But the signs are always there, eventually. So now I'm focusing on healing. I've thrown myself into work, keeping my days full so the nights don't swallow me. I avoid rom-coms. Even the light-hearted ones turn my stomach now. Every on-screen kiss reminds me of his lies, of what I once thought we had. I used to love those stories, not anymore. I don't know much about Laura's mother, but I believe she'll deal with Nick in her own way. He told me once, early in our relationship, that he used to know her, claimed she was kind, supportive even. Then later he changed the story, said she never liked him, said she'd ruined his career. The contradiction said everything. I hope 2022 is kinder to everyone reading this. I hope, if you've ever felt like I do, used, discarded, doubting your own sanity, you find peace. I hope you find the courage to walk away, even if your voice shakes, even if your heart breaks. Because at some point, enough has to be enough. Elise's story is heartbreakingly familiar to many who've been in toxic, one-sided relationships. What began with love and support slowly unraveled into manipulation, financial dependency, and emotional neglect. Her journey illustrates a painful but powerful truth. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is walk away quietly and protect what's left of ourselves. In real life, toxic partners often disguise themselves with charm, ambition, or promises of a future that never quite arrives. They depend on your empathy, your resources, and your belief in them, but rarely invest the same effort in return. Recognizing that imbalance is key. If you find yourself constantly making sacrifices while your partner offers excuses, pay attention. Love is not supposed to be a one-way street. You should never have to beg for respect, emotional safety, or honesty. If you're always giving, always fixing, always covering for someone else's mistakes, it might be time to ask yourself, what would life look like without this weight? Practical advice? Keep your financial accounts separate. Pay attention to patterns, not just words.
If someone consistently blames others for their failures or uses your kindness as a crutch, that's a red flag. Make a quiet exit plan if you need to. Talk to a therapist. Rebuild with people who pour into you as much as you pour into them. And finally, don't be afraid to start over. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave the door behind you closed, even if you loved who lived on the other side. You are not disposable. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You're simply free.